Hello and welcome to day 3 of The Giants. My name is Tip. I'm part of the Blackbird team and I will be your host for this session. We are extremely lucky to have Luke Annear as part of the Giants conference. Thank you so much for joining us, Luke.
Hi, Tip. My pleasure. Hi, everyone.
So Luke is the creator of Australia's latest unicorn safety culture, which helps businesses manage and embed a strong culture of safety and compliance into their everyday workflow. And his journey has been a wild one, from a trainee private investigator to Tony Robbins videographer to founder CEO of a billion-dollar company. And we can't wait to hear the perspective you've gained along the way, Luke. So the best people who can help founders are other founders who've gone before them. So today is a perfect opportunity for all the early stage startup builders out there to learn from Luke. Ask and upvote your favorite questions on slido.com using #Luke, and make sure you tweet out what you've learned from the session using #Giants. The topic of today is starting from adversity, and it really came about because of how Luke started Safety Culture. So without too many spoilers, Luke would love to hear the origin story of Safety Culture, how you got it started, and how has the mission evolved over time?
Wow. Okay, that's a big question. How long we got? Half an hour. No, I'll give you the 3-minute version. But look, as you said, I was a private investigator. But even prior to that, I had my first business when I was 16, which was a glass recycling business. I used to go around to the old pubs and clubs and take all their spirit bottles and empty beer bottles and things and put them on a train and send them down to Brisbane. And that didn't go so well. I had friends after school who were helping me sort the coloured glass from the clear glass and things like that. But I think it was basically a free rubbish removal service for alcoholics around town. So after a few months of that, I ended up working in a local business, and that's probably where I learned a lot of the fundamentals about business. My mentor Bill Smith, who I remained very close friends with until he passed over sort of 20 odd years. He said, like a dollar saved was better than a dollar made, because you don't have to pay tax on the dollar that you save. And so there were just fundamental things that I think I learned. And so, by the time I, took a job out of the Brisbane paper as a trainee private investigator, something that sounded pretty cool and actually was a really cool job. I really enjoyed it. I was on a surveillance team. We were following people around and seeing what they did every day and filming their activities, mostly for the insurance companies. But at some point, it occurred to me that, I needed people to get injured at work in order to be able to go and have this fun job where I get to spy on people. And so, I think over time, I realized that I wanted to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem, and do something that made the world better. It was all good fun, sitting in the back of a car and then chasing people through traffic and all that sort of fun stuff, and the chaos that came with it. You'd literally sometimes be jumping in cabs and saying, follow that car in front, and then getting out and running through traffic in the Sydney CBD and things like that. So it was a lot of fun, but at the end of the day, I wanted to do something more. And so I started Safety Culture to help employers, initially just in Australia, to train their staff to work well. And I was providing training documents online, and it brought the costs down across the industry, the compliance industry in Australia, by about 90%. It was a really good set of products that we offered. And it was a lifestyle business, earning up to about $1 million a year with 2 staff. And life was pretty comfortable. And then for whatever reason, I decided to, take on the world and do something from a mobile first perspective. And a couple of things that happened leading up to that. There was an incident in 2009 where a 19-year-old named Marcus Wilson died putting roofing insulation in a house in St. Mary's in Sydney. And some people may be aware of the story, but the roofing insulation saga was basically a government handing out a lot of money for people to insulate their homes. And this young guy died the first day he was on the job from heat exhaustion. And they used one of our documents. The employer had given it to the regulator and said, we trained him to work safely based on this document. And when I had a look at the sales records, they'd bought the document 2 days after he died, and then had forged his signature. And so, nowadays it kind of pushed me away from compliance, actually. I think compliance is a pretty boring subject. And so, when you're saying it's a safety compliance business in the intro, I'm like, oh, it's not anymore. We're a tech company now, very much so. And we actually don't build compliance products at all. We build best practice tools for quality and all sorts of things. So So yeah, that was really the beginning of my shift in thinking around compliance as a goal. I thought that's a terrible goal. The law is the minimum standard for society. It's not best practice. And if you raised your children based on what the law said, you have to clothe them, you've got to take them to school, and provide medical care for them. Like, if that's your standard of parenting, you'll be the worst parent in your street. And so you've got to read to them at night and all this other stuff. So I kind of thought, it's the same for people in the workplace. So how do we help them do something that makes them better at what they do each day? And of course, coming home safely is part of that. But I think a lot of people take that for granted now, and a lot of countries have really developed standards that achieve that for most of us every day. So doing your best work each day while you're at work is what we focus on for the bulk of our customers. And so yeah, that's kind of how it all started. Skipped a bit along the way, but that's the short version of it.
Love the story about how you started in the hospital bed, actually, and how safety culture started as an SEO strategy. So maybe could you talk to that a little bit as well?
Yeah, so when I had the docs business from 2004 to 2007, it had a very sexy name. The business was called Wade's Business Solutions, which is terrible. And there's a story as to why, but anyway, it's still a bad name. And I went to a search marketing conference in Atlanta in the US, flew over from Townsville, met a whole bunch of search marketing people, and came back. I had knee surgery and was on my back for 6 weeks. And I then turned the whole business into an online business. We went from having telemarketers who were annoying people and ringing them and saying, do you need safety documents, to then having customers finding us who were searching online. And overnight, the whole business transformed from one where we were trying to sell products to people, even though they were great products that people should have. We're still pushing products on people, and we transformed it into a business where people were contacting us and saying, this is exactly what I need. That really taught me a lot about meeting the market where the need is versus trying to sell and educate a market. And it's a long way around to educate a market on why they need your products. And so today, when we think about building products at Safety Culture, it's always, how do you intersect the product with the need and the wants of the customer base at the time? And I think that's probably more art than science, and more intuition than logic. But that's what we think about now, and it's something that stuck with me for a long time, because I went and bought a whole bunch of microsites and really gamed the search engine from 2007 until 2010, when Google brought out the Panda update that spanked all the naughty people like me who are duplicating content on different websites and things. And that strategy didn't work much after that. But for those 3 years, if you typed in, like a excavator safety procedure, there was like the top 8 out of 10 results on page 1 of Google were all my different sites, and had about 1,200 different microsites. So it was a great strategy at the time. Doesn't work today, but that was how the docs business became an online business, and it taught me about intersecting a product with a market need.
Awesome. I'd love to dig in a little bit about how your ambition raised over time as well. You said Safety Culture started off as a lifestyle business, and eventually it grew to be something so much bigger. What were the catalysts along the way that just kept ramping up your ambition?
Yeah, I think the opportunity just continued to open up in front of us. What we were sort of stumbling on was a universal need for workers all around the world, and the wants and the needs. People want to work safely. They also want to do a good job all day. Even if you work in a Subway store, you still take pride in the sandwiches you make, and you don't want customers complaining about your service. No one enjoys that. So I guess there's some universal memes that are present across all parts of the world. They permeate all languages and all jurisdictional boundaries, and so the company's kind of tapped into some of these, and really we've been restricted by ourselves, our own ability to think big enough and execute fast enough, because the way we've built our products, they work across all industries. And it's been interesting, we just closed the funding round, which people probably know about, but one of the things that the team have really found difficult for the past 8 years since we launched iAuditor, the checklist app, is that the product was so broad and it was so flexible that people could adapt it to use to meet any workflow, that whenever they went to write a marketing message or try and build for a persona, are we building for the researchers in Antarctica or the United Nations in Afghanistan that are using iAuditor for checkpoints, or, the guys who are launching rockets in space? And so that was always been a challenge. But the irony is that now with COVID-19 and industries being impacted really hard, the fact that we've been so broad and we've been across so many industries, it actually has protected us. And that's been really interesting to watch unfold as well. So, I think that it's hard to know all these things in hindsight, but the opportunity has just continued to get bigger. And today, we've evolved from just a checklist app to now also helping with workplace training and incident reporting and, sensors for checking fridges and things. So it just keeps expanding.
I want to dig into that a little bit more. What did you mean by being broad protected us during times of crisis? Sorry,
can you just repeat that?
What do you mean by being broad actually protected you?
Well, if we just build a product for construction, or we just build a product for the aviation industry or for hotels, then, I've seen founders who've lost 95% of their revenue in the space of 2 weeks in March, because, the aviation industry just completely shut down. And so I think, we didn't see that kind of severe drop because, we're in hospitals and they're ramping up. We're customers who are running big fulfillment centers around the world, supplying all of the home deliveries, they're increasing their users with us. So where we saw drop-offs in some industries, we saw increases in others, and that kind of counterbalanced it. I'd say that's probably more good luck than good management that we ended up being so broad. But it's definitely something to think about. I think, it's great to go deep on an industry and solve a problem really well. I think there's a lot of value in doing that. But in this case, the way we built the company was to solve a very broad problem. And it's right now it's helped us. Maybe we need to be more industry specific, I think, in the years ahead. But it's an interesting dichotomy.
Awesome. And let's switch gears to talking about fundraising, especially in the early days, actually. What were the lessons that you learned during fundraising, and when was the right time that you knew, hey, let's start getting VC funding?
Yeah, look, I didn't know what VC funding was. I didn't know what venture capital was. We were just a couple of kids in a garage in Townsville, Alan and I, and we were just building a product that companies were using. And so when Rick Baker came down the driveway from Blackbird, with a briefcase full of money, not literally, but he came down the driveway and said, look, I heard about what you're doing, and I love it. I think I was on the project on Channel 10 because I had the first pair of Google Glass in Australia. And Rick came and wanted to learn about what we're doing. And even at that point, I thought, I don't know why I would take money, but he introduced me to Mike and Scott from Atlassian. They screened me for the call. I think it was the first business that Blackbird had ever put $1 million into at the time. And then they did Canva just after that, a month or a couple of months later. And so it was a big deal. Mike and Scott had to personally kind of approve, companies. And it was when I spoke to those guys, and in particular, Scott then started to spend a fair bit of time with me. I realized there was way smarter ways to build this business than the way we were doing it. And that's why I took the capital. It was, my mindset was that you build a profitable business from day one. I didn't understand venture capital or venture debt or any of these things. And so I was just going to try and do that. And we had one small way that we monetize. People could buy a Word sort of feature, unlock feature for their reports when they do an inspection. And they pay $7 one time, and then we never get money from them ever again. And that was what I was doing until Rick came along and really opened me up to a whole new world. And here we are. So I think, that's what you look for in an investor, is a partner, someone that you can help build the business with. We've never offered board seats. There's only 3 people on the board, including myself. And so we've never really gone and offered board seats just because people are handing over money and things like that. We always try and find the best partners to build the business with. And I think that's served us over time. We've had a great relationship with our investors, and we've got investors that we can go to with good news and bad news, and that's important. When I met Lee Fixel, he did the Tiger Round in 2018 out of New York. He was, he'd heard about us. He looked at us in 2015, or one of his team had, and they didn't invest. And he called me and said, "I'll come to wherever you are." You know, he flew in his jet to the San Francisco jet base, and we met in the boardroom there. And within 90 minutes, we'd had the deal pretty much nutted out. But one of the things I did in the due diligence, I spoke to other founders and said, you know, one of the questions I asked was, how would Lee and I have a falling out? And it's a thing that I often ask myself, because it's easy when times are good and everybody's high-fiving each other, but you want to understand, how do people behave under stress, and where do they go when they're really hurting or when they're fearful? And I asked these other founders, you know, what would be the thing that would cause Lee and I to have a falling out? And they all gave a consistent theme in their answer. It was, you know, just be straight with him. And then when I met with Lee, I asked him, I said, look, I've been talking to people and I've asked this question, but I want to ask you, how will you and I have a falling out at any point? And he just said, there's one way. He said, if you bullshit me about anything, I'm out. He said, if you tell me what's wrong, then I'm here to help. But if you bullshit to me, I can't help you. And I thought, this is a guy I can work with. And it's been great.
Love to know what some advice you've actually learned from Mike and Scott from Atlassian in the early days.
Yeah, look, Scott's the person I've spent the most time with. I've met Mike a bunch of times, but Scott's the one that really deeply dug in, and he put a lot of time into me personally and into helping safety culture, you know, particularly early on. And I think the advice he gave me from the beginning was that the hardest part of this journey is to grow personally at the rate of the opportunity. And I think that's been true the whole way. It's a tough gig, and my role changes, you know, every 6 months. What I do in a day is changing. And so that's not an easy path, but you know, I never, Mike Horn, the explorer, I saw him the quote last week where he said, like, he's never met a strong person who had an easy life. And, you know, I think adversity builds character. And so, you know, it's definitely been one of the hardest parts throughout this. And the other thing is just, you know, it's a long journey. There's tours of duty that people will do. Scott said to me early on, the people that you have today are probably not the people who will lead the business 4 years from now. And I really found that hard to accept. I was like, nah, I'll be different. I'll take everyone on the whole journey. But the reality is that most of the early people are still with us, but they didn't all want to progress into leadership and management roles. Like, you know, I sort of have, Alan and I joke all the time. Alan still works as a software engineer and he's very happy doing that. And we joke that, you know, he can have my job for a day and I'll do his, because I think, you know, he says it's hashtag CEO life. Whenever I'm dealing with some problem, he kind of enjoys the fact that he's not. So, you know, people do tours of duty, and I think Scott helped me put that in perspective as well. But he's helped with so many things.
And on the point of scaling, what were the painful lessons from scaling from 6 people to 60 people to over 300 people now?
Yeah, well, I think it was like we doubled from 30 people. Actually, we went from 9 people to 30 in 3 months. So that was stupid. And no one had a clue what they were doing. So we got through that. And then we went from 30 to 60 in about a year. And that was not too bad. And then we went from about 85 to 320 in 18 months. And that was ridiculous. I don't recommend anyone do that. And I think we just lost the discipline. As you're scaling up, and, you know, I'd try and empower people and let them run. And my style of management is very hands-off, a bit too hands-off. Unless there's a problem, I'll dig in. But generally, I just let people run. And so, you know, our people team at the time and all of the teams were just really, I think, thinking that if we get another person for this role, then we can do more. And it's just not the case. And so we lost some of the discipline and the critical thinking around how we build and how we help our customers. And it was just too many people too fast. I think we didn't have any real data around our hiring structure. It was all fairly immature, you know, early stage sort of processes. And when we hired Chris Reed he came in from Google and helped build a lot of the Sydney team for Google. He started taking a very data-driven approach to it, measuring the entire funnel from when we first contact people, where they come from, and then also, you know, what percentage of those people go through to face-to-face interviews and what goes through to a job. And it was the first time we really had visibility on our hiring funnels. And I think one of the stats he pulled out, he came to me and said, you realize last year, it was like over 80% of people who turned up for a face-to-face interview were given a job. And it was like, either we have the best screening in the world, or we gave too many people jobs. And so it took us a year to correct from that. And it was just people, we didn't have training, we didn't have the support for people. And so that's why I don't recommend you go from 80 to 320 too quick. But I think now we've got the balance right again, you know, and we are able to be disciplined, and we think hard and long about, you know, a role before we put it out there, so you can support people to do their best work, because you want everyone to win, and that's how we all feel good. No one feels good when someone doesn't work out.
One of the audience members asked, what's the pros and cons of having your team be based in Australia, in Sydney?
So the first part of the question was, what was it about cons?
Pros and cons.
Oh, pros and cons. Look, I think early on, the US investors that I would meet, they would often say, when are you coming to the US? I think that argument is all but dead these days. You know, I think there's more and more companies coming out of parts of the world. You know, as long as you have good internet, some good universities, access to talent. You know, Australia's still a bit thin in regards to experienced talent with certain roles. Product managers, like we're looking for like a chief product officer or head of product now, and there's just not a lot of experience and depth in Australia. But I think we can nurture a lot of that talent. You can find people who have potential and help bring them through. I'm always, you know, a big fan of backing people with potential, but not always the experience. And so, yeah, I think you can make your own luck, you know, and it requires more discipline. You know, one of the things when we got to the US to talk to VCs over there was that, you know, our numbers, our cohort net retention, which is like the expansion rate of your customers. If there's, you know, 100 people today, how many will there be 12 months from now for that one group of customers? And our cohort net retention was at 182%, which is like amongst the top of the SaaS companies in the world. And we didn't even realize that was good. That's just what we built. And so I think there's advantages in having, you know, not always having access to unlimited amounts of capital and things like that, and the mindset that comes with it from building a company out of Australia. So I think Australia's great. I don't have any plans to move to the US, and we have our biggest customer base in the US. We have a great team in the US. And it works. You know, we get around, you employ local leaders who are fantastic at what they do, and we're fortunate we've got a great team, and that gives people the opportunity to grow and lead as well.
This is a tough question from the audience, but also the number one question they ask: in your 15-year journey as founder and CEO, what's been the closest you've come to say, nah, that's it, I'm done, and you want to go do something else? And has it always been worth, given the sacrifices you've made to date?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's interesting. So there's probably many times earlier on when I would say, I'm done, like it's just too hard, because we were fighting for survival. I can remember in 2014, we had to migrate to a whole new database, a whole new backend. We went from App Engine to Amazon. So we rebuilt everything to AWS. And we thought it would take 3 months. You know, there's a whole story to that. We had a guy from Sweden who said he could do the whole thing in 3 months on his own, and he was like a genius. And so he started it and then bailed. And, you know, our core team, who's still with us today, ended up picking up the pieces. But it took a year. And we had mattresses in the office, people doing round-the-clock shifts as we're trying to migrate it. You know, it nearly killed us. And I think there's times like that where there's certainly periods of uncertainty where you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. Those times you think, oh, this is too hard. So there's been, you know, plenty of times like that. I think anyone who's honest with themselves going through something difficult, it's probably had times where you want to quit. But these days we don't have the issues of survival anymore. It's really about how far we can go with this opportunity, and that's up to us. And so that's more energizing than anything. You have, you know, I think as you mature as well through the journey, you realize that it's good days and bad days. Sometimes it feels like everything's against you, and other days it's the wind's behind you. So, you know, I think there's been plenty of times, but not so much now. And has it all been worth it? Oh, look, I think I've never really stopped to ask, to be honest, because like, what if the answer's no? And then what? I'm, you know, walk around and say, oh, gee, it hasn't been worth it, and people will be like, oh, cry me a river. But no, look, I think you make sacrifices along the way, but you look back, and the challenging times are the ones we probably look back on most fondly, and you learn and grow the most from. So that's that adversity, you know, building the character again. And also provides perspective. It makes, when things are going well, it gives you a sense of gratitude and appreciation that it is going well. And so, there's been lots of sacrifices along the way, but I don't know what else I'll be doing. As an entrepreneur, it's not like it's really a choice. I've been, building businesses since I was 16 years old, and if I wasn't doing this, I'd be doing something else, and this one's going okay. So I think it's all looking pretty good.
Awesome. Another question, how do you think the business landscape will change post-COVID, and what impact will that have on safety culture?
Look, I think there's obviously higher sanitation, hygiene standards coming through than ever before. It's a bit like pre and post September 11 for security at airports. I don't think any of us really want to go into a restaurant now and turn a tap on in a bathroom. We just want the infrared sensor to turn the tap on for us. And so, I think there's some levels of awareness that will change habits. There seems to be, the SARS in 2002 is really what helped Alibaba. You look at Alibaba's revenue prior and post SARS, all of a sudden China got locked up and they had to shop from home, and that's really changed the trajectory of Alibaba. And you're probably going to see a similar change in spending and shopping habits, I think, for particularly supermarket shopping, where people are now used to buying their groceries online, and we'll see some of those people never go back to shopping in a store every week like they used to. So there'll be changes around those sorts of things. I think the airline industry is going to take a couple of years to recover by the looks, and hotels, and who knows where cruise ships are going to end up. But I think the main thing out of this is we've all, as a global community, just been given a first-hand example on how easy it is to transmit disease and viruses, and so that will forever change this generation, at least. Anyway, maybe the next generations will look back and say that was the COVID generation who were always carrying hand sanitizer in their car and washing their hands every 5 minutes. But I think it's probably here to stay, and it'll be here for a while. So I think some of those things are probably the biggest habits. The other thing is working from home. There's a lot of positives that are coming out of this. Some people are struggling with it. Some people are really enjoying it. Some are in the middle. But I think what it has taught us is that we've designed our lives around our work in the past, and now all of a sudden we're seeing people designing their work around their lives and saying, well, my kids are home, I need to spend time with them in the afternoon, so I'll work from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. Or first thing in the morning, and it's largely working. And so I think there's some flexibility that we'll gain from this. I've always been actually a bit of a fan of the 4-day work week concept, which I've never had anyone really support me. And across any time I raise it, everyone's like, nah, that's not a good idea. But I actually think we can be super productive, and I think a lot of people are pretending they're busy. I know, in the workplace, we're in the office, we're all like trying to look like we're doing stuff all the time. I think we can just stop pretending, accept that sometimes we're really productive and we get stuff done. Sometimes I work, 6 days a week, 15, 16 hours in a day, and that's okay for a while. But I think hopefully out of this, we can actually say, people work best in different styles. And although we usually have to work in a team, there's a way to build some flexibility into that for individuals and families. And if people are able to relieve some of the family pressure as well, I think the expectations on mums and dads these days are so great that if we can do something to relieve some of that, then they're likely to be more productive when they are at work, and they're not as stressed. So people are exercising more, people are spending more time with their families through all this. So let's try and take some of that forward and draw the positives from it.
And how's Safety Culture's team doing working from home, and with communication, coordination, all that stuff? What initiative are you guys taking?
Yeah, we're doing all the things I think most people are doing. I do the video update, which I shared one of the updates the other week on LinkedIn, which lots of people gave me feedback on. It was from one of the Morgan Stanley calls that I'm on each week from the chief economist and others in New York. And so, we're constantly informing people with as much information as we can on the team. And just checking in, I think people are getting a bit fatigued from surveys, but I'd rather us over-survey the team. How you doing? Do you need anything? Than under-survey them. So, we've just ramped up the communication, made sure that people are checking in, defaulting to video rather than Slack messaging. Slack has its place. I banned Slack about 5 years ago, which is a bit draconian, but people were using Slack for full-blown stand-up arguments and writing essays on there. And they wouldn't stop, and usually they're sitting 3 feet from the person they're arguing with, And so I was like pulled Slack for a week, which I didn't realize at the time. I didn't think through that all of our DevOps alerts and everything for our servers was coming through Slack too. But anyway, we got through that week, and I think we were super cautious as a result of that coming into this to say, look, develop good behaviours early, put your uniform on each day, start work at the time that works for you, make sure you have a plan for your family and your home, you set expectations. We put a lot of effort into making sure that people were communicating well with their team and their families. And I think that set us up to be in a pretty good place. We also took precautions. We had people working from home before the government mandates came in. So we haven't had anyone impacted directly by COVID-19, thank goodness. And the team's got through this so far really well. But yeah, there's still a way to go.
Great. Last question. I think it's a great one from Michael Spicer that came through chat. For the people that have recently lost their jobs and they want to start a startup, they want to become a founder, what's an advice to them to get them going?
Yeah, look, if you can start a company right now in this climate, then the discipline that you develop will serve you for the rest of your life. This is a time where running a business really efficiently is rewarded, and you just have to have the discipline to really be creative about doing things on a shoestring budget, reducing costs, and getting creative. There's just so many simple things that consultant fees and all this sort of stuff that people waste money on a lot of the time isn't necessary if you just dig in and you can outwork people. Your time is the best resource you have. You can outwork a lot of people and make a lot of progress from just working harder. I know Cliffy, one of my best mates at Canva, he recruits people off the street. He's renowned for it. He's recruited Annie, the cleaner at Canva, off the street because she was carrying a vacuum cleaner down the street. She now cleans dozens of homes for teams at Canva, including mine and our office and everyone else. And the chef at Canva, Chris, he came from a restaurant around the corner. So, it's if you get creative about how you do all these things, how you recruit, how you go to market, then there's ways to build a business efficiently. And I think that's the key. I would try not to be raising money between now and June next year if possible. And that's how I would be thinking about it. If I was starting a business, I would say I don't want to be raising any money. It's going to be too hard. And just figure out how to build a business anyway. And that discipline of, okay, we need to actually do something that creates value and builds revenue, that will serve you all the way through. So that's how I would think about it, and just give it your best shot.
Awesome. All right. That's a wrap of Giants Day 3.